I'm Shuli Babbitts, and I work in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs here at HHS. I am so excited to teach you how to write better and communicate more effectively. Here at HHS, we're always communicating. We write emails constantly, many of us write reports and proposals, and we often share information with the public. Plain language guidelines will help improve all of your written work, starting with the very next email you write. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of this training, take a second to ask yourself an important question. Why do you work for HHS? And while you're thinking about your own reasons, let's take a look at this short video from an HHS colleague as she shares her reasons for being a part of the HHS mission.
I'm Candace Lee, Assistant Chief Nursing Officer in Ambulatory Care at Phoenix Indian Medical Center. At this hospital, we believe in making things better. Every unit has an action plan, and we strive to reach our goals and to fix any problems. I was born in this hospital, and I've always felt a connection to it. My grandmother was a Pima Native, and my grandfather was African American. I'm proud of my heritage, and I know I can celebrate it here. When I was little, I wanted to be a doctor, but I saw how patients really relate to their nurses, so I went for nursing instead. 98.7. In primary nursing, we take ownership of each patient and their progress, so we already made that up. I've gotten to know many patients and their families. Do you have any questions? We are here for them for their whole lives. I love that feeling of having the power to help. Working for the Indian Health Service is not about a paycheck. I do this because it's my calling. I'm Candace Lee, and I'm a nurse for the Indian Health Service, and I am HHS.
Candace makes a point we can all relate to. We're here to help people get the services they need to lead healthy lives. And whether you're providing direct care like Candace, or you're supporting a program, a grant, a policy, a contract, we are all part of this mission. I shared Candace's clip with you because she communicates clearly. Her communication style helped us understand her and trust her. And that's what makes communication effective. So if you take one thing out of today's training, and I hope you'll take more than that, but the huge takeaway is that the goal of communication is to build connection and trust. We need to take complex information, even when it's boring or hard to understand, and punch it up so it connects with our audiences and builds their trust in us. So this is the high-level takeaway, but we also have some very practical goals. This training will give you the tools to improve the next email you write. What are today's training objectives? When we're done today, you will know how to do 5 things. 1. Define plain language. 2. Identify the myths surrounding plain language. 3. Explain the benefits of using plain language. 4. Describe the technical elements of plain language. And 5. Apply plain language techniques to real examples. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. Aside from these grander goals I've just shared, let's think practically about why we communicate in our work. What are common goals we have when we communicate? There are so many different reasons why we need to communicate. Sometimes they're very straightforward. You need to summarize or describe something you're working on, or you need to ask or answer a question. Maybe you need to announce an event. Sometimes our writing needs to be more complex. If you need to analyze, critique, or evaluate a document, or discuss an issue, or offer advice. Sometimes we're trying to motivate our audience to do something, inspire or motivate them to take a particular action or support a particular policy or strategy. All of these goals aim to create connection. Writing in plain language helps people understand your information. People trust information they understand. If they get it, they trust you. Connection. If they don't get it, they're gone. I've been a government communicator for 15 years. I've written everything from press releases and speeches to contracts and reports. Through my work, I've collaborated with leadership at NIH, FDA, CDC, and here at ASPA. All of them agree that plain language is crucial to effective writing. No matter what you're writing, and no matter how educated your audience is, everyone wants content that is easy to understand. That is even more true when it comes to the information we share here at HHS. If we want to ensure our nation's health, we need to make sure that everyone understands what that means and how we do it, especially if they're not experts. So remember, we are all in this together, even with the most influential federal government agencies. And we are all looking to up our games. Today, we're going to talk about how to apply a plain language approach to our writing to make it accessible to all audiences. Let me lay out the roadmap of what we'll be covering today. First, we're going to define what plain language is and challenge some common myths about it. Then, we're going to talk about the benefits of using plain language in written communication. We'll then take a deep dive into the principles of plain language. And finally, I'll show you how to apply plain language principles to written content so we can see it in action. Plain language, or plain writing, we use those terms interchangeably, means that your writing is clear, concise, and well organized. Your audience can find, understand, and use your information quickly and easily. Speed and efficiency are key to effective communication. Today, people expect to get information quickly. Think of how you scan through a web page or a social media feed. People generally don't read from top to bottom. They scan for the information they're looking for. If they can't find it, they're out. That's why we don't want any barriers standing in our way of finding and accessing information. Plain language helps you break down those barriers, and today I will help you learn the basic principles so you can apply them to your writing. Another defining feature of plain language is that it is actually a law. A lot of people may not realize this, but if you work for a federal agency, the Plain Writing Act of 2010 requires that you provide content to the public that is easy to understand and use. Every year, agencies must report their implementation of plain language to Congress. The fact that these issues are being discussed in the halls of Congress shows you how important it is. And that's because as government leaders, we have a particular responsibility to our audiences. We are public servants, and that differentiates us from companies selling products or services. Our bottom line is not net income. Our bottom line is improving public life. At HHS, our bottom lines are safe vaccines, pediatric visits, a national suicide hotline. When you consider what we're communicating about, it's obvious that we must be clear. And yet, somehow, that need for clarity gets lost among the many rounds of review, among the many experts who clear our materials, and among a lot of misconceptions and fears. Because everyone loves plain language in theory, but in practice, not so much. Why is that? Here are just some of the myths about plain language that I've heard. Plain language is unprofessional, inaccurate, or imprecise. Readers expect official-sounding language. Technical terms are authoritative. Plain language dumbs down the content. And of course, this is how we've always done it. People rely on these excuses to avoid writing in plain language. It's like the default setting for so many people's writing is complex sentences, long words, and long documents. And many subject matter experts think this style impresses readers. I'm here to tell you that it does not. Long sentences and big words do not make you sound smarter. In fact, they harm your credibility. When you're long-winded, readers lose interest. When you write clearly, readers follow you. Now, I'm not saying we should sacrifice accuracy for clarity. Of course, accuracy comes first. But it doesn't have to come at the cost of clarity. When you are too complex, you push your audience away. You break their connection with your content. On the flip side, when they can follow you, they believe you. They'll connect to your content. There is research to support the claim that everyone prefers plain language. Jacob Nielsen is the pioneer of the usability field. That's the principles of what makes writing and design effective for users. His firm, the Nielsen Norman Group, conducted a study of experts in science, technology, and medical fields. The study clearly showed that highly educated professionals like these want content that is clear, concise, and scannable. Specifically, professionals want clear, concise information devoid of unnecessary jargon or complex terms. Plain language benefits both consumers and organizations. The research summary goes on to say that no one complains that content is too easy to understand. Aside from being easy to understand, how else does writing in plain language help improve our ability to connect? Plain language helps spark curiosity. As you may have noticed, we are always on our phones. And yet, most content we see is so boring. We want our content to be memorable, meaningful, and productive. That's what sparks curiosity. Only content that's easy to understand can do that. Only content that is short and scannable can do that. Plain language improves accessibility. We must make sure that people with disabilities or facing barriers of all types can understand and use our content. If we want to make our programs accessible, we must make our content accessible. That's what plain language helps us do. Plain language also increases our productivity. Content that is unclear leads to frustration, confusion, and wasted time. What happens when people are confused? Either they will seek clarification from you or your staff, which wastes valuable time, or they will just give up. Plain language helps reduce this confusion by helping people understand your information the first time they read it, and that saves everyone's time and resources. Finally, plain language boosts engagement. You can measure how well your materials are doing with a variety of analytic tools. How many clicks to a web page? How long did people stay on your page before hopping off? How many people opened your email blast? How many people engaged with the social media post? When your content is clear, you're likely going to see those numbers increase. And I highly recommend keeping close tabs on that data, because that's how you demonstrate success to yourself, your team, and your leadership. Now we're going to get into the real meat of a plain language approach. A plain language approach starts with your audience. Let's say your colleagues want materials to promote a new program. They give you all of the background on how they developed the program, who is backing it, how long it's been in development, blah, 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 blah. You're going to include all of that, right? Wrong. You are not writing for your colleagues. You are writing for your audience. And no matter how fantastic that extra information may be, your audience only wants to know what applies to them. that's a very small part of this Venn diagram here. The best way to grab and hold someone's attention is to think about who they are and what they want to know. So really, you want to be intentional in thinking about a few questions. What is the goal of your writing? Is it to educate, to promote, to analyze, to persuade? And why does your audience care about what you're writing? Put yourself in your audience's place for a second. If you were them, what would you care about? What questions would you want answers to? And finally, what will they do next? Give them a call to action that's more than just learn more. Some way that you can track their response, like click a link, sign up for a program, post a response. Make your call to action specific. People will respond better, and you will be able to track those responses in a more meaningful way. So these are the questions you want to be asking and answering as you begin writing. Once you have those questions answered, you can start writing. Again, you want your writing to be clear, concise, and well organized. What does that look like? Well, first, it needs to be well organized. You start with the most interesting and relevant aspect of your content. Don't bury it at the end. Like, for example, if you're hosting a webinar and sending out an email to promote it, don't start with a paragraph called Introduction that explains all the background about the problem you're trying to address. Start with Register for ASPA's webinar on plain language. Learn how you can ... I'm not saying to turn your content into clickbait, but I am saying to make the beginning of your content as relevant and eye-catching as you can. Also, keep it short. Your sentences and paragraphs should both be short. Count the words in your sentences. When you hit 20 words in a sentence, stop. Try to keep your sentences to about 20 to 25 words. If your sentence is a lot longer than that, shorten it. Break it up into 2 or more sentences. Same for paragraphs. Group your ideas into 3 to 5 sentences. Break up long blocks of text with headings that summarize your idea in just a few words so readers can skim through your content to find what they're looking for. The longer you must read, the harder your brain must work to process that information. Content that demands less work to understand keeps people's attention. So what helps you stay concise? The other principles of plain language. Those are using active verbs and familiar words and avoiding technical jargon and undefined acronyms. I have a lot more to say on each of those principles, but before we get to that, let's do a quick knowledge check on these first plain language basics. Question 1. Where does the main point of a sentence or a document belong? A, at the beginning, B, highlighted in the middle, or C, at the end? It's A, at the beginning. Start with the most interesting and relevant aspect of your content. Don't bury it at the end. Question 2. About how many words does a well-written sentence have? A, 50, B, 80, C, 20, or D, 10? The answer is C, 20. Remember, keep track of the words in your sentences and you will be able to break them up. Now, let's take a deep dive into using verbs. Verbs help you look alive. They look alive when they're active and they bring you down when they're passive or modifying. Now, what does all that mean? Active voice is when the subject of a sentence performs the verb's action. Like this example, Liz writes a history paper. Liz is the subject. She is doing the action, writing. History paper is the object. That is what receives the action. Passive voice is when the subject is acted upon by the verb. So, the paper was written by Liz. Active voice sentences have a strong, direct, and clear tone. It's obvious who is doing what to who. Generally, that makes active voice sentences easier to understand. Passive voice has a subtler and weaker tone, and it automatically generates more words in your sentence. Passive verbs go hand in hand with hidden verbs and lead to that bureaucratic, long-winded style that we are trying to get away from. Use the clearest verbs possible. It is much easier to say apply rather than fill out this application, or comply rather than maintain compliance with. Use verbs that directly convey your point. So instead of be sure to carefully wash your hands, just say wash your hands. These are ways to reduce the number of words in your sentence, and most importantly, to get your point across more clearly. One more thing, you'll notice that active voice and direct verbs use pronouns like us, you, we, our, instead of one or he, she. Pronouns help you speak directly to your audience, and they make your tone more personal and empathetic. So use them. Let's review what we've just learned with a quick knowledge check on the difference between active and passive verbs. Here are some sentences that I took from actual HHS materials. Do these sentences use active or passive verbs? Materials must be submitted with enough time in advance to allow for appropriate review and coordination. While expedited review and coordination may be necessary, a 48-hour lead time is requested for most materials. Are these active or passive verbs? This sentence uses passive voice verbs. These sentences, which are supposed to be giving us instructions, leave us with a lot of questions. Who submits materials? Where do you submit materials? Who is requesting the 48-hour lead time? Guidance like this is going to lead to a lot of wasted time. If I'm reading this, I won't be able to move forward until I figure out who to ask them, then wait for their response, and then hope I understand what to do. Here's an easier to understand way to convey it. If the sentence was in active voice, the guidance would be much clearer. Maybe something like, submit your materials to pressreview@hhs.gov. Allow 48 hours for review and approval. That's a lot easier to understand. Let's look at another example. Is this active or passive? HHS agencies offer resources to help you eat smart, exercise regularly, and get routine health screenings and vaccinations. Is this active or passive? This is a great active voice sentence. HHS agencies offer resources. We know who is offering the resources. And what do the resources help you do? Eat, exercise, and get vaccines. All active verbs. A bonus on this sentence is that it also uses a pronoun. HHS helps you eat smart and exercise. That personalizes the action and helps build a connection to the audience. Another really important plain language principle is to use words that are familiar to everyone, words that people would say in real life. When you can say share, there's no need to say disseminate. People are much more familiar with the word many than they are with the word numerous, just as they are more familiar with use instead of utilize. It is easier to read, spell, and understand. We often use words in our writing that are longer and more complex than we would use in ordinary conversation. Words like additional, a number of, concerning, or necessitate put distance between you and your audience when what you're trying to do is connect. Your 9th grade English teacher may have told you that using million-dollar words or SAT words would earn you good grades. That may be true for academic writing, but when you're writing for the public, words like these will not earn you engagement or build connection with your audiences. Research shows that they will lose your audience's attention and fast. Words like more, some, about, or need keep people reading, so use the simplest words you can. The same goes for these meaningless phrases. In order to, the fact that, in terms of, first and foremost, at the present time. They don't mean anything. They complicate your point, lengthen your sentences, and waste your audience's time. Wordy constructions like these are what the federal plain language laws are trying to get at because they damage our government's credibility. Federal writing is not creative writing. No one is curling up by a fire with a cup of tea to read your report. So knock these extra words out and get to the point. I can't stress enough how much undefined abbreviations like acronyms and initialisms detract from your ability to connect with readers. First of all, let's talk about the difference between an acronym and an initialism, because we use a lot of them in the federal government. An acronym is a set of initials that you pronounce like a word. So, NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity, ASH, or Assistant Secretary of Health, FOIA, or Freedom of Information Act, OpDiv, or Operating Division. An initialism is a set of initials that you pronounce as letters. So, TA, or Technical Assistance, FY, or Fiscal Year, OS, or Office of the Secretary, CFO, or Chief Financial Officer. In some ways, abbreviations make our lives easier. But on the other hand, they define an environment that only certain people understand. So when you're talking to your colleagues, you can assume that everyone knows what they are. But audiences outside of your colleagues generally don't know what these letters stand for. When you're communicating with these wider audiences, you have to define them. Otherwise, you are leaving out and confusing anyone who is not an insider. The main rule about acronyms and initialisms is that you have to define them the first time you use them. So in this example, we define the acronym and initialism the first time we refer to them and put the initials in parentheses. The Maternal and Child Health Bureau, MCHB, released a new Notice of Funding Opportunity, NOFO, this week. Once you've defined the acronym, you can just refer to the letters on later references. So, learn if your organization qualifies to apply for this NOFO. Contact MCHB for more details. Also, if you don't know what the letters stand for, find out. Because if you don't know what the letters you're using stand for, then neither will your audience. And then you've really lost them. Another element of plain language is avoiding technical language. There are two types of technical language, technical terms and technical jargon. Now, what do they mean? Technical terms are the words we use as part of our subject matter expertise. Terms like postpartum depression or pre-existing condition or appropriated funds. These are terms that we really can't get around using. Let's look at some examples. Each HHS operating division and staff division has an assigned small business specialist. We understand that small business specialist is a specific term. We can define and explain it to our audience. If you need to use a technical term, put it in context or with an explanation so that an average user can understand it. But this sentence goes on. Small business specialists have specialized knowledge and experience focused on leveraging strategies for increased utilization of small businesses. Phrases like specialized knowledge, leveraging strategies, and increased utilization are technical jargon. They are vague, too complex, and create a bureaucratic, insider tone. These are exactly the types of words and phrases that the Plain Language Act is trying to help us get rid of. Don't use them. A better way to say this is small business specialists help your team understand the benefits and processes of working with small businesses. Isn't that easier to understand? Now that we've gone over what the principles of plain language are, let's put them into action with some more specific examples. Let's take a look at a sentence from Guidance to Healthcare Providers who support people with disabilities. OCR issued guidance making clear that in light of the continuing COVID-19 public health emergency, when resources can be scarce, it is vital that individuals with disabilities are not prevented from receiving needed healthcare benefits and services because of discrimination. Whoever wrote this sentence hadn't yet taken our plain language training. How do I know that? Well, let's go back and think about the basic principles of plain language. Is it organized? The main point of this sentence is don't discriminate against people with disabilities. That point comes at the end of the sentence instead of at the beginning. Is it short? This sentence is 41 words, twice as long as recommended. Is it active? Individuals with disabilities are not prevented. That's passive. Who should prevent this discrimination? We don't know. Does it use familiar and necessary words? Overall, the words are familiar, but there are a lot of unnecessary words and phrases. In light of, when resources can be scarce, because of. We also see an undefined initialism that should be the Office of Civil Rights. How can we use what we just learned about plain language to make this sentence clearer? How about people with disabilities need access to healthcare benefits and services without discrimination? The Office of Civil Rights issued guidance to protect people with disabilities from discrimination during the COVID-19 pandemic. No one knows better than I do how challenging it can be for government agencies to use plain language. There are so many complicating factors, and there are many exceptions. Writing in plain language is a practice, and just like your exercise routine, it takes persistence to see results. We don't have to be perfect, but we can try to apply plain language principles as much as we can. When it comes to language that we do have control over, let's make the effort to use plain language as much as we can. Because some plain language is always better than none. So don't give up. The more we try, the more we can all contribute to making government communication easier to find, understand, and use. Here are a few resources that I would highly recommend. The Elements of Style. I often refer to this basic guide to effective writing, and it includes a lot of the tips about active voice and unnecessary words. And plainlanguage.gov is a team of federal employees dedicated to plain language, and the site has lots of great resources and examples. Let's do a quick review of what we've learned today. Communication is all about connecting to your audience and building their trust in you. Plain language principles help you write clearly so you can connect and build that trust. These principles include write short sentences, using active verbs and recognizable words. Avoid using acronyms, technical jargon, and meaningless phrases. Thank you so much for joining me today and making it all the way through this plain writing training. I hope you learned a lot that will help you and create effective, meaningful connections with all of your audiences. Please feel free to be in touch with me at shulamit.babbitts@hhs.gov if you have any questions. If you would like more training that is personalized for your team, please reach out and we can work together to support you. And I'd love to get any feedback you have on this training and on using plain language in your work overall. Thank you and good luck as you put these plain language principles to work.